It started with a crowd, a park, and a violinist everyone knew. People gathered around, smiling and clapping as the famous musician played with flair, soaking in the attention like it was his right. He was known not just for his talent, but for his ego, the kind of man who didn't just perform, but expected the world to revolve around his stage. Cameras rolled. Social media buzzed. He had the spotlight, and he knew it. Then, there was her, a woman sitting quietly on a bench nearby, eyes down, clutching a worn violin case that looked like it hadn't seen sunlight in years. She didn't cheer, she didn't film, she just watched. And that, somehow, got his attention. He called her out, joking at first a little performance banter. The crowd laughed, expecting another trick, or perhaps a light-hearted challenge. But when she shook her head and tried to shrink back, he pushed harder. "Come on," he said, "let's see what you've got." The crowd cheered louder. Not realizing the line between showmanship and pressure had been crossed. Reluctantly, she stood. No flashy clothes, no stage presence, just a tired look and hands that trembled slightly as she opened her case. The famous violinist smirked. Not out of cruelty, at least not that he'd admit, but with the confidence of someone who had never really been challenged. Not by someone like her. She lifted the bow. The crowd went quiet. Even the birds seemed to pause mid-song. What happened next left everyone stunned, especially him. But before the first full note could even settle in the air, the energy around them shifted. And in that exact moment, you could feel it. This wasn't going to be just a casual street performance anymore. Something much bigger was unfolding. No one knew her name. It's just a quiet woman in simple clothes, standing awkwardly in front of a crowd that didn't expect much. Some even looked away, already assuming it would be painful to watch. But when she drew the bow across the strings, something strange happened. It wasn't just a note, it was the kind of sound that made you stop breathing for a second. Pure, sharp, beautiful. People blinked, confused. Even the famous violinist froze, his smirk fading just slightly. The thing is, he had built his career on flair. Fast fingers, dramatic gestures, complex arrangements that dazzled but rarely touched the soul. He was a showman, and the audience loved it. But this woman, her playing was different. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy. But every note she played landed like it meant something, like it had been lived. Whispers spread through the crowd. Who is she? Where did she learn to play like that? Even the man who had mocked her moments before found himself gripping his own violin tighter, watching closely. She wasn't just matching him. She was telling a story through the strings, and people could feel it. The tension between them grew. With every passing second, he stepped forward slightly, lifting his violin again, as if preparing to interrupt or reclaim the moment. But something about the way she stood there, calm, steady, stopped him, like she wasn't trying to compete at all. And that made it worse. Some started recording. Others stood in stunned silence. The quiet woman, once invisible, now held the attention of every single person in that park. Yet she didn't look up, didn't smile, just kept playing, as if the world around her didn't exist. But beneath that calm surface, there was a secret, one that hadn't been revealed yet. The famous violinist stood frozen, watching her fingers move with quiet precision. Each note chipped away at the certainty he wore like armor. The crowd that once cheered his name had gone silent, and in that silence, his ego began to crack. He had called her out to embarrass her, maybe even boost his own performance by showing off. But now, every second she played was exposing something deeper. Not just about her, but about him. What no one knew was that years ago, before the spotlight and stages, he had trained under a strict, almost obsessive instructor. That instructor had spoken once, just once, of a prodigy who vanished. a young woman who played not to perform, but to feel. A talent so raw, so untamed, it scared people. He remembered the story now, though he'd never believed it. Till today. She paused. For a moment between pieces, just enough to breathe, not enough to break the spell. The crowd leaned in, not wanting it to end. Somewhere off to the side, an older man in a faded coat whispered to his wife, "That's not just music. That's pain." And that was the difference. She wasn't just playing to impress. Every note felt like it was pulled from somewhere far deeper. Heartbreak, maybe loss, maybe something no one in the crowd could name. People weren't just listening. They were feeling. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, a music agent who had been recording the famous violinist for a live stream now shifted the lens. He zoomed in on her face, then her hands, then the scars on her wrist that only the careful viewer would notice. The feed was blowing up. Who is she? What's her story? This is unreal. Comments poured in as the video spread. But through it all, she never looked up, never acknowledged the crowd, the camera, or the man beside her. Because she hadn't come here by accident. She had a reason, and he was only just beginning to realize it. The crowd held its breath as the woman's bow hovered over the strings once again. The famous violinist's eyes narrowed, a mix of frustration and curiosity flashing through them. This wasn't going how he expected. The confident showman, used to applause and adoration, now felt a strange tension knotting in his chest. He had started this moment to prove a point, to reclaim his spotlight. But it was slipping from his fingers like sand. She began to play again, slow at first, then building, not in volume, but in emotion. Each note carried weight, pulling at memories, shadows, and unspoken stories. People around them exchanged glances, some whispering about the raw honesty in her music, others about the sudden crack in the famous violinist's confidence. He shifted his weight, gripping his own violin tighter, ready to respond. But the melody she played wasn't just music, it was a challenge. Behind her calm exterior, something simmered. This wasn't a random street performance. Her hands trembled only slightly, but her eyes held a fire, a purpose. She wasn't here just to play. She was here to send a message. The famous violinist's thoughts raced. Could this quiet woman be the one his old instructor warned him about? The prodigy who disappeared. The story he had long dismissed as a myth. The agent filming raised his camera higher, capturing every detail. The tension, the faces, the silent battle unfolding in the notes. Viewers around the world were tuning in, holding their breath alongside the crowd. As the final notes of her piece hung in the air, the violinist stepped forward, bow raised. The moment was electric, a showdown not just of skill, but of pride, history, and something deeper neither wanted to admit. The question was no longer who would outplay whom, but what this moment would change for both of them. And then, just as the silence seemed unbreakable, she looked up. Her eyes met his for the first time since she'd taken the stage, steady and unflinching. The crowd shifted, sensing the sudden shift in energy. This wasn't just a musical duel anymore. It was something personal. Then, without warning, she spoke, her voice soft but clear enough for those close by to hear. "You taught me once," she said, "but you never recognized me." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The famous violinist's face tightened. Recognition flickered in his eyes, but he quickly masked it with a forced smile. He opened his mouth to deny, to laugh it off, but she cut him off. "I wasn't always the quiet woman in the back. I was the student you lost when I disappeared." The revelation stunned everyone. The story he had dismissed as a myth, the prodigy who vanished without a trace, was here, in front of him, playing him at his own game. The stakes, suddenly, soared beyond a simple competition. It was a reckoning. The crowd was electrified. Cameras zooming in on their faces, capturing the unfolding drama in real time. Comments flooded in online. No way is this real. The lost prodigy versus the famous violinist. This is history in the making. He stepped back, the confidence slipping from his posture. The pride that once made him untouchable was now a fragile mask. But instead of backing down, a fierce determination sparked in his eyes. This wasn't just about music anymore. It was about proving who truly deserved the spotlight, who had the right to play and to be remembered. She raised her violin again. The quiet woman no longer invisible, but a force ready to challenge everything he thought he knew. The tension climbed higher, the crowd silent in anticipation. What would happen next was anyone's guess, but one thing was clear. This was far from over. The famous violinist's breath hitched as she played the first notes of her final piece. It was different now, no longer just a display of skill, but a pouring out of everything she'd held inside for years. The music told a story of loss, betrayal, and quiet strength, each note sharper than the last. The crowd was spellbound, feeling the raw emotion radiate from her fingers. He tried to respond, lifting his violin, but the usual ease was gone. His fingers faltered, the weight of his past mistakes pressing down harder than ever. He had built his reputation on technique and showmanship, but now faced something deeper, a truth he couldn't hide from. The crowd's eyes were on her, the quiet woman who had transformed into the undeniable star. As the final chord lingered, silence fell over the crowd like a heavy curtain. For a moment, no one moved, caught between awe and disbelief. Then, slowly, applause erupted, not just polite, but heartfelt, growing louder with every clap. Even the famous violinist found himself clapping, though his face was unreadable. She lowered her violin and met his gaze once more. "I left because I had to. Find my own voice," she said quietly. "Not because I wanted to disappear." He nodded, understanding now that the rivalry was never about skill, but about recognition and respect. But just as the tension began to ease, she surprised everyone. From her case, she pulled out a small notebook, flipping it open to reveal handwritten notes and compositions, music he had never heard, music she had written in secret all these years. "This," she said, "is what I've been working toward. Not just playing, but creating." The crowd gasped. The famous violinist's eyes widened. The quiet woman wasn't just a player. She was a creator, ready to rewrite the story starting with him, and with that, the future of music itself felt uncertain, thrilling, and wide open. The famous violinist lowered his bow slowly, the realization settling in like a quiet storm. He wasn't just facing a competitor. He was facing someone who had grown beyond the confines of his world, a woman who had taken her silence and turned it into something powerful. The crowd watched as the tension between them softened, replaced by a mutual, unspoken respect. She closed her notebook gently and smiled for the first time that day. It wasn't a smile of victory, but of relief that her music had finally been heard, that her story was no longer hidden in the shadows. The quiet woman had stepped into the light, not to steal the spotlight, but to share her voice with the world. The violinist stepped forward and extended his hand. It was a gesture of humility, acknowledgement that sometimes the greatest lessons come from unexpected places. She took it without hesitation, and the crowd erupted into applause, not just for the music, but for the connection forged between two very different paths. As people began to disperse, the music agent approached her with an offer, eyes wide with excitement. This was more than a street performance. It was a new beginning. Her journey, once quiet and unseen, was now a story others wanted to hear. And for the violinist, it was a reminder that talent is not only about skill, but about heart, growth, and the courage to listen. The day ended not with rivalry, but with harmony. The famous violinist and the quiet woman had shown everyone that music isn't a battle to be won, it's a language to be shared. And sometimes, the most unexpected players bring the richest songs. In the end, it wasn't about who outplayed whom. It was about the power of music to heal, to connect, and to surprise us when we least expect it.